Hello everybody, it's me, GhostCritic, here with the promised surprise video this Friday. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous. I've been on here, this April will be my 8th year on YouTube, and I've done something like 920 odd videos over that time, and I've tried to vary my output and my content on here. So, you know, you've had your new comic book day, you've had your comic book reviews, you've had your hauls. I've chatted live with a number of you on the PCP podcast. And all sorts of things along the way. But I have to say that what I want to do here has me the most nervous at showing you lot out there than I've actually ever been. I just hope you like it, because it's, as you probably already gathered from not only the title of this video, the thumbnail, the descriptive bar, I'm going to be talking about the most favourite of runs that I've ever read, and I think it always will be. I don't think anything will ever top it for me. I'm talking about Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, and you will understand my trepidation on this when you hear the rest of the video that comes after this. I'll keep it short introduction. Because I've seen people do this before, but on a more broader scale. I think it was Mind the Comics did a kind of overview of each volume of the trades. Scott and Tim, Howler Mouse and Custom Bromstar, did these amazing live videos talking about the Sandman, and I don't know if they're still there, because I think they were on Scott's channel before he had to remove everything off social media for personal reasons. If you know Scott, you will know why. But they were just amazing, and I'm just kind of wanting to take it a step further, foolishly, but as I say, it will all be explained properly in what comes after me rambling on here. I do hope you enjoy it. Basically, it's a scripted podcast. All you will hear is my voice. There are some pretty pictures and moving images if you really just want to stare at a screen, but you can go off and make a cup of tea while you're just listening to my voice. There's no reason to watch the screen, but this was just the easiest for me to put this out. So yes, it's a scripted podcast. So if it sounds a little clunky at times, I apologise. And I have the first 3 episodes scripted. This is the only one that I've actually edited and put together, because I kind of, like I said in Wednesday's video, I want to put the feelers out first if this is something you would like me to continue with. And we'll see how we go. Please comment down below with any questions or opinions of the podcast you're about to hear. I would love to hear your thoughts down there. Give this a big thumbs up if you really love it. And if you're not yet subscribed to me and you don't want to miss any more of these potential episodes, then do please hit the subscribe button and just let me know that you want to hear more of these. So I will bid you adieu, and I hope you enjoy what comes next. In 1989, I was teetering on the edge of adulthood. As a 17-year-old, American comics hadn't fully entered my life as it was to many times some 5 years later, but I knew about them. My phase of reading comic books at this time came from those published in Britain with hip and cool names such as Deadline, Toxic, Crisis and Revolver. If you were to look into these monthly anthology magazines, you would see names instantly recognisable. Grant Morrison, Sean Phillips, Mark Millar, Garth Ennis, Shaky Kane, Alan Grant, and many, many more, all who have become the standard of great creators over in the American pond of comics today. So when Karen Berger had already made Neil Gaiman put pen to paper and created one of the best comic works ever produced, her words, and for that matter mine too, the first issue was out on the stands, but I was oblivious. I was in a wet and miserable corner of the Lake District, dreaming, funnily enough, of bigger and better things, but most of all, of getting out. By the time all 75 issues were over in 1993, I was setting off to a performing arts college, finally free of the shackles of home life, a broken family unit, setting out on my own to live out my dreams of becoming an actor. Now, the thespian dream may have died some 5 years on, but it was in a student digs with an eclectic assortment of fellow wannabes with stars in their eyes that a graphic novel was thrust into my hands by a girl who was not all that dissimilar to a character within the pages of this series, Delirium. The book was a volume 2 in the series of trades entitled A Doll's House, and I was immediately taken with it, reading and rereading each page ravenously. For my shame, I don't think I ever returned that book back to her, and as I left college it came with me. And not long after that, I sought out further volumes, and it was here I began my journey with the Sandman from the beginning. Here I am now, almost 30 years later from that very first issue, having read this series countless times and still obsessed enough with it to do, some may say foolishly, a podcast discussing each issue. I hope you're ready. My name is GhostCritic. You're now entering the dreaming, and this is the SoftLands podcast.
Bring me a dream, make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him 2 lips like roses and clover, then tell him that his lonesome nights are over.
If you've been with me for a while here on YouTube, you may have heard me say that The Sandman is one of those comic book series that with each read, it's hard not to pick up something you missed on previous reads, and this time was no exception. Maybe it was because of this podcast that my critical eye scrutinised each issue even more, but from the very first line my brain began to turn. It cannot be without some stupidity on my part that I missed the potential meanings of just the first 2 lines that start us were, "Wake up, sir, we're here." While the driver is obviously alerting the passenger, Dr. John Hathaway, that he has reached his destination, I can't help but wonder if Gaiman is speaking directly to us. Important things are about to occur, dear reader. You better have your wits about you. But it also seems quite ironic that a title predominantly about dreaming wants you to wake up from that comfortable, sleepy space as if we were not yet ready or well equipped to take those steps into the flights of fancy that are to come. Now, this issue begins in the grand tradition of, say, a Hammer horror film or an English ghost story by the likes of Dennis Wheatley. A bleak, almost featureless landscape with an isolated manor house dominating, the lifting of a brass knocker to make our arrival known. A door creaks open, only slightly ajar. A servant peers out, announcing our presence is required in the study. The sparse and oblique exterior is then broken by a sumptuous study cluttered with occult paraphernalia, and within that second page a deathly deal is struck that will set into motion a journey like no other through 75 issues. All we need is a full moon, and then there will be no turning back. I almost feel as though the opening credits should be flying by at this moment. Now, it may seem strange that after these allusions to bringing death to an end, when we next look through the gates of our mysterious manor some 4 days later, we spy on 4 seemingly unrelated people from around the globe, but for one thing in common: dreams. In Canada, Ellie Marston finds dreams terrifying. In Jamaica, Daniel Bustamante finds dreams magical. In France, Stefan Wasserman finds his living dreams aren't quite what he expected. While in England, Unity Kincaid dreams of a tall, dark stranger. Gaiman, never one to waste a character he introduced to the reader, comes back to these 4 individuals throughout the first issue, and for one of them, the consequences of this issue sends ripples out to many storylines to come. Roderick Burgess, our Dark Lord of the Manor, it comes as no surprise, dreams while awake, and those dreams pertain to personal power and glory. Burgess is played as a type of Crowley-esque wannabe, although Gaiman has often said that the character wasn't really influenced by Crowley, and more from the novels of Dennis Wheatley, though in turn, Wheatley based most of his magicians, evil or otherwise, and warlocks on Crowley, so the similarities are actually there. So when the full moon aligns and the witching hour of midnight has arrived, we as the reader, perhaps unwillingly, much like the young son of Burgess, become participants in this dark ceremony, complete with occult symbols drawn on the floor, a congregation of hooded figures chanting, our Magus with his summoning incantations, which I'm relieved to say were completely made up by Gaiman. I always had a fear that if I spoke these types of phrases out loud, and not just from the Sandman, but anything of this ilk, that I would be meddling in powers I didn't understand or wouldn't be able to control. So now knowing when something as authentic sounding as within these pages were, it was all poppycock, had no evil power behind it, and I could enjoy putting on my actor's hat and playing out the character aloud with no fear of repercussions. At the culmination of this ceremony, as the chanting reaches its peak, when all words have been spoken, the Magus reaches into the darkness, almost taunting his prey to appear from the blackness to do his bidding. We get our first look at... well, we really don't know just yet. The figure looks suitably dark in costume, although not exactly physically foreboding, as it lies on the floor in an almost fetal position. However, it doesn't take long for the Magus to realise that what he has caught is not, in fact, death. How he knows this is not really explained by Gaiman. What was Burgess expecting? A skeletal figure carrying a huge scythe? For those who have read The Sandman before, that stereotypical image of death couldn't be further from the truth if he tried. However, the night does not appear to have been wasted, and they pillage this figure of a necklace, a helm, and a pouch, leaving their captured quarry naked, alone, and seemingly imprisoned inside the occult circle. It's at this point that we make one of our first returns to those 4 globally distant characters we glimpsed on earlier in this issue. Ellie from Canada falls asleep while reading a book and never wakes up again. Daniel from Jamaica sees his magical castle within his dream disperse and then wakes too scared to go back to sleep. Stefan from France finds he can no longer sleep and has the doctors diagnosing it as shell shock. And last but not least, Unity from England spends more time asleep than awake, though no dreams come to her. It is, of course, of no coincidence that all these events happen alongside the capture of our man of mystery. The pieces all start falling into place, but before the reveal, we witness the cruelty of man in pursuit of power, wealth and notoriety, as 4 years later our poor professor who first struck the dark deal can bear it no longer, and instead of owning up to his pillaging of the Royal Museum at the bequest of Burgess, he leaves a suicide note and then stabs himself to death. But our Magus is not without his black magic and uses it to destroy the suicide confession, leaving Burgess in the clear to continue his watch over his captive, who has yet to utter a single word aloud. As I've mentioned earlier, Gaiman does not waste a person or even a thing he introduces to his book. It's rare to see him use a story device to get him over the next hurdle and then discard it as it's no longer useful. And we read of the sleepy sickness that is spreading, and we see it's not just confined to our four unfortunate souls, as we see the first fall to this possible virus as Stefan, our child back from the war, kills himself after being unable to sleep for over a year. He dies at the age of 16. Perhaps a note of interest here is this death is picked up and utilised much later in a mini-series entitled The Corinthian, once again identifying the lack of throwaway characters in the Sandman mythos. Everyone has a purpose. Another 6 years later within our story, and Gaiman finally hints and reveals a bigger world yet to come and introduces the reader to a group known as the Endless, of whom their members are at the least made up of death, desire, destiny, and to allow Burgess the contentment of knowing his son will follow in his footsteps, he allows him to discover their prisoner is in fact Dream. Remember here that Dream has been a prisoner now for 10 years. He's not spoken, apparently not eaten, just observing, biding his time, and being part of a collective called the Endless. You would well surmise he therefore has all the time in the world to make his move or escape. The story moves now another 4 years to 1930, and while we see the gradual breakup of the Order, where deceit and treachery abound, we learn more of the movement of the artifacts taken from Dream and the power they possess, adding more layers of the supernatural and lands where demons tread to be encountered later on in Gaiman's run. Of course, those people don't have a happy ending. The power of gods in the hands of mortals never goes well. The years continue to pass by and our four dreamers, now 3, still sleep, their lives and families drifting away, Unity's life being all the more tragic as she is the victim of rape, a child born of this violent act which is then adopted, all while she sleeps unknowing. It's at this point that we first see Gaiman incorporating the DC universe as a whole. With Dream imprisoned, there now lies a void in the world that needs to be filled, and that universe tries to fill the hole with a replacement. And this comes in the guise of Wesley Dodds, aka the Sandman, a yellow gas-masked hero with his own sense of justice via a sleeping gas he created himself. And where did this new nightly vigilantism idea come from? Where else but dreams? Time passes once again, and we move another 8 years to find Roderick, an old man and nearing the end of his life, but not before one last tragic tirade towards Dream, who in his dying breaths mourns the loss of his youth and the inevitability of death. It's maybe of some interest at this point to discuss why Dream's fellow brothers and sisters did not help in Dream's escape. Even if they had not known up until this point where he was, with Roderick dying, death would be present, as always when someone dies, and at this point would surely have had the opportunity to assist Dream. But Gaiman has insinuated in previous interviews that the Endless were always aware of Dream's capture, but they are not a superhero team in the literal sense, and, in Gaiman's own words, stick to hoeing their own farms, concluding that Dream would actually have been angry for the help, a reaction that would make more sense in the approach Gaiman would take with a character in later storylines. Many years after his father's death, Alex starts questioning Dream's incarceration and what his next step should be. After all, what do you say to someone you've locked away for 40 years? I'm not sure that a simple sorry, however sincere, is going to cut it. So Alex finally chooses to continue to leave Dream in the bowels of the mansion, hoping that he will be dead before Dream gets out, and then of course he will be someone else's problem. And so the years go by, and Alex profits from the general public's fascination with the occult and all things supernatural, and we speed through the 70s. Alex getting ever older and more frustrated at Dream's silence and lack of cooperation, until we reach the late 80s and the culmination and inevitable climax of this first issue. The seal that has kept Dream captured all these decades is broken, as Alex, now wheelchair bound, turning to leave, rubs away part of the seal, enslaving our prisoner, and so we now witness Dream's escape and how he takes revenge. His guards, unaware of what has happened, lazy, self-absorbed, talk of sun-drenched beaches, upcoming summer holidays, and by one of the guards merely daydreaming about these, Dream is able to acquire a much-needed commodity in his line of work: sand. Feigning death, Dream waits while his captors all worry and wonder what step to take next. And here, the foolish humans open the door to his womb-like prison he has unwillingly called home for the last 70 years, and becomes the superhero as he uses the sand to perhaps put them to sleep. Now back in his place of power, he calls forth the dreaming. Dream still finds himself in a weakened state and must clothe and eat. So he uses the dream of a Mort Notkin, who is currently dreaming of a party filled with dead celebrities such as Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, and John Wayne. The brief scene is amusing due to the fact that Mort has come dressed as a clown, thinking it was a fancy dress party, which it isn't. And Dream steals chicken from the Colonel himself, KFC Sanders. But as I read this with a keener eye, I look at our dreamer's name and start to look for perhaps deeper meanings. Mort, obviously French for death, but while Notkin doesn't seem to have a meaning as such, split the word up to not and kin, and you get death not related. Am I reading too much into this, or was it a hint to a perhaps unused path of a storyline to do with the two Endless siblings' relationship? But I digress. The reader now takes the first gaze of what will be a familiar look to our main character and what contributed to many a copycat dresser of the male goth teenager. Pale face, the long black hair, long leather trench coat and boots. At the release of Dream and with his strength returning, we see the sleeping curse of our characters Ellie, Daniel and Unity broken, as they also awaken with a mixture of shock, relief and realization. Yet Dream is not yet done. There is still the punishment of the surviving member of the Burgess line, Alex. And how apt that he should be napping, and therefore in the realm of Dream. This is not going to end well. Alex wanders down a gloomy corridor lined with mirrors, being led by a black cat, all the while becoming younger with each step, till reaching a small room at the top of a winding staircase, where our black cat alights upon a single chair and morphs into Dream himself. This motif of cats will be revisited many times in Gaiman's run of The Sandman, and I'm sure we will talk about it in further podcasts. And Alex is now that young, frightened boy again we saw at the start of this issue. Dream is rightfully angry at his false imprisonment and demands answers and reasons as to why this was done to him. Flustered and in fear of his life, Alex manages only to make things worse by admitting that they were actually looking to capture his sister Death. Now, let's for a moment think what would have been the consequences if they had captured Death. While we understand that with Dream captured, this did not affect everyone, what they accomplished was disconnecting many people from dreaming. But if Death had instead been incarcerated within that circle, would that have actually meant a great many people just would not have died? The ramifications of that, looking at just some of the chronological real-life events going on at this time that Dream was incarcerated, could have been catastrophic. We had the First World War, Battle of the Somme, Second World War, the Vietnam War, hundreds of thousands of people killed and many, many more wounded. All those people would still be alive, burned, maimed, crushed, blown to pieces, buried beneath tons of sunken wreckage at the bottom of the sea, but alive. There was the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic that killed millions worldwide. Would a proportion of them be still living, although in huge amounts of pain and able to ease their misery? And that's not including all the regular accidents, ailments and aging that occur on a daily basis, or even considering the now longevity of insects and microbes. As Dream concludes, you'll never know how lucky you were. And when you think of it that way, the punishment he puts upon Alex of eternal waking, that moment of thinking you've just woken up for a dream, only to find you're still dreaming, then waking up, but repeat that continually, doesn't seem that unjustified or callous, as we see his dreams of gory and gruesome false awakenings, including melting faces, heads falling into his lap and still talking. And so this issue ends as it began, with the act of waking up. Only this time there is an urgency to it. And as before, I can't help but think the Gaiman is telling us, the reader, to get ready for the ride of your life. You're going to need all your wits about you, so wake up!